prompt you. And David, take it away. Tell us about watersheds.
Yeah, so as Rob said, we might be going a little long today. It might, longest it would be is an hour and a half, and you can always come back and watch the recording later. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay. So watersheds, watershed threats, and watershed protections. Why water? Water is the source of life on Earth. Humanity's increasingly abusive relationship with water has led us down the watershed death spiral, with drought, flood, and fire all increasing in frequency and severity. We can reverse this cycle and ensure an abundant and productive future by simply changing our relationship with water. And that's from the Water Stories website. And start out with what is a watershed? The land area that water moves across or under while flowing to a stream, spring, pond, lake, or river. The area of land where all the water that is under it or drains off of it goes to into the same place. So you can see this boundary of the watershed here, and you can specify, divide up watersheds into smaller watersheds. And notice on the diagram off on the left, the groundwater and saturation of the soil is even with the surface water there. Another diagram of a watershed and how there's percolation from rainfall, snow, and so forth that helps replenish the groundwater, which is also can be called an aquifer if there's a significant amount of it, and it's generally used for human use. For well, aquifer refers to usually underground water that's used for wells and irrigation and that kind of thing. And the water cycle, this is where it all begins. So you get precipitation, surface runoff goes to the lake, a lot of it percolates into the ground, and then it can go into this lake, it can go into the ocean. Rivers generally flow out of lakes unless they're landlocked and go to the ocean. You get a lot of evaporation from the oceans that feed the cycle. And here's another diagram of it. Ocean.
David, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you go back to the other one? What are the numbers? Are those mentioning some amount of where the water that goes in that area?
I could not find what that was specifically referring to. It could be proportional, but it would greatly vary from one locale to another and all the variabilities of weather. So I thought it was a good diagram in spite of those numbers that we're not going to pay attention to. So here it says with evaporation, ocean contributes to about 80% of the total water vapor in the air. And then that vapor goes over land, and if the conditions are right, we get snow or rain from them. And here you can see right next to the ocean, you can get saltwater intrusion. And as we'll get into a little later, you can have, with groundwater depletion, you can have further intrusion and problems. So a little bit of water underground, it fills fractured rock, gravel, soils, and this is the water table right here, and water will flow to areas where, if the water table is high enough, you'll get surface water on land that's not in the oceans. An aquifer is an underground layer of water-bearing permeable rock or unconsolidated material such as gravel, sand, silt, or clay from which underground water can be usefully extracted using a water well. And so you see here, they differentiate between an unconfined aquifer and a confined aquifer. And the unconfined water can easily percolate from the surface into the aquifer, and they are generally more easily polluted from activities on the ground. And if you get a less permeable rock layer and there's an aquifer underneath, that's called a confined aquifer, and those are less susceptible to pollution. But when you get injection wells and fracking and so forth, that they will get punctured and can get contaminated more easily that way. And of course, aquifers provide water for wells. You can see this diagram, where the water table, the well has to go below the water table, otherwise it'll be a dry well. And a little bit more about confined and unconfined aquifers. You can see the water table with this line right here, and you have a well that's below that water table, and you'll actually have flowing water regularly. Depending on where the well is in relationship to the water table and so forth, you'll have different situations about how much water and how well it flows and so forth. And aquifers are get depleted. A number of the world's aquifers are being depleted by drought and then over pumping for irrigation water and so forth. Like the Ogallala aquifer in Nebraska and the Great Plains is a very large aquifer that is getting depleted. Has been progressively getting depleted over time. And this diagram just shows kind of the ways that it can get fully depleted. And when aquifers get depleted, it worsens drought conditions. It of course lowers the water table. And if you're near the ocean, you can get saltwater intrusion from that, which then harms the water supply. Even if you push back the saltwater intrusion, there's some contamination from that. Land can actually sink from aquifer depletion because that's actually filling space underneath the land. And this really busy slide here just shows some comparisons between unhealthy streams and healthy streams. And even the healthy streams can be taken as kind of a relative thing, because these are not pristine, but on a relative basis are much healthier than the ones on the left, where there can be toxic mine and drainage sediments, stormwater runoff, smothering from sediment deposition, low oxygen, and algae blooms like from fertilizers and actually fire retardant used on wildfires is basically a fertilizer, and it can cause algae blooms. Nutrient and sediment runoff from livestock operations, nitrogen from air pollution, and fields without cover crops, altered water flow and habitat from development in dams, and loss of bottom dwellers. And over here on this side, on healthy side, just a lot of critters that are native to the, or natural in the stream, and live because are able to live because the water quality is good enough. And this right down here below just covers some of the ways that watersheds are looked at for how healthy they are. And say for biological conditions that there's a balance of different, they call it trophic structures, which basically different levels of fish life and aquatic life, that some predators, some prey, and so forth. And really healthy watersheds maximize water retention both in surface water and water below ground. And in drier locales, you're going to have less surface water and so forth. But in most natural watersheds, there was more water retention than what we've done with in what we've done with our watersheds.
Hey, David,
yes.
I have a question. So I'm just wondering about cover crops. You said cover crops are part of an unhealthy watershed. You want to explain that to me?
No, actually, it was cover crops help to protect and make for a healthier watershed, because you don't get pollution, sediment, and like even soil from uncover crop farmland can blow into the river, and it can have pesticides and fertilizers in it. And so cover crops are positive.
I misunderstood you. Thank you for that.
It had without cover crops on the left side, and then it had with cover crops on the right side, on the good side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with this film, which we'll run it to about 11 minutes. Water, Earth's blood.
What I really want to leave you guys with, the first thing is the new water paradigm. Why that's something that's important, how it can benefit you directly and your children. The second thing is the old water paradigm, how that put us into the situation that we're in, climate change, extreme climate, drought, fire, and flood. And then the third piece is water and how it's Earth's blood. And if you want to understand nature and water, just draw that analogy between yourself, your own body, and the Earth as its own living body. And you can really begin to understand a lot of things. And so if you look around and look at nature, you can see it all over in the creeks and the rivers. This same architecture mirrors our own veins and the circulation of our own blood.
Can you see?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody can see the video. I can.
But it's actually the water moving.
I can hear it. Can't see it.
No, I can't
I
see it
can't
either.
see the video. I can only hear it.
Screen save again. There you go.
Oh, you're not seeing the.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
stop the share then.
Something happened.
And so it never showed up.
Not for me. I still saw your PowerPoint. So
Not for me.
Oh,
so maybe put that in a separate window from the PowerPoint, and then
Can you see that?
I can see that.
Okay.
Yes.
So we
Sorry
should
about
start
that.
over.
yeah.
Oh, that's
sorry.
good. Learners, good to learn new things here. Great.
What I really want to leave you guys with, the first thing is the new water paradigm. Why that's something that's important, how it can benefit you directly and your children. The second thing is the old water paradigm, how that put us into the situation that we're in, climate change, extreme climate, drought, fire, and flood. And then the third piece is water and how it's Earth's blood. And if you want to understand nature and water, just draw that analogy between yourself, your own body, and the earth is its own living body, and you can really begin to understand a lot of things. And so if you look around and look at nature, you can see it all over in the creeks and the rivers. This same architecture mirrors our own veins and the circulation of our own blood. And it's not just the water moving through the land, but it's actually the water moving through the air as well. And the trees are moving and controlling and respiring this moisture.
When you finish.
So this is the water cycle. The sun heats up water off of the oceans, and that water vapor, in order to turn into clouds and rain, it has to have a condensation nuclei to form around. One of the main ones is hygroscopic microorganisms produced in the underside of tree leaves. And around these microorganisms, the water vapor condenses into liquid, forming clouds and then rain. As that phase change happens, the water vapor goes from really big to really small and creates a vacuum effect. The same kind of thing is happening as trees respire. They're cooling a huge amount of area, and they're bringing moisture back into the atmosphere. So they're actually an elemental part of this. As the moisture drops, it creates more low pressure, drawing in more moisture from the coast, and that water is hitting cool, shaded ground and infiltrating into it. This is feeding springs, rivers, creeks, keeping that water clear, cool, and healthy throughout the year. It's recharging the water table, and this is a living, breathing cycle called the biotic pump, where the trees and the ecosystems on land are actually creating the moisture cycles and this conveyor belt moving moisture from the oceans inland. So this is how Earth's biotic systems work, how the living systems of this living planet, we call it planet Earth, you could really call it planet water because most of the surface is water. And this is just such a key component. Now, what do we do to that? Well, we come through, we cut all the forests, we clear all the land, we drain the wetlands because that's where all the good soils are. We make a bunch of bare ground for farming. We build cities, we build piping networks to drain all that water away. And this slowly degrades the water cycle. On the hot, dry soil, like a dry sponge, it can't absorb any of the water. So the water, when it hits, just flows right off, leading to flooding and erosion downstream, but leaving drought. All of that water goes to all of the riverways and waterways. And so we think they're clogged up. We dredge them deeper, but that actually lowers the water table in that whole ecosystem when you dredge those rivers deeper. So as all that hot air is hitting, the sun's just heating all of that up, and it's creating these high pressure domes that actually, as that maritime humidity tries to enter, it's pushing back on it, and the pressure just builds. Eventually the pressure is so much it overwhelms these heat domes and creates these huge cloudburst flooding events. And so this is a cycle of drought and flood. When the rain comes, its power is too much, it erodes the dry, dead landscape, causing flooding and erosion, but all the while the water table is actually sinking deeper and deeper, even though there is flooding. Now, the rivers are starting to go dry, the springs are starting to go dry, the fish don't have enough oxygen. The ecosystems are really beginning to collapse because there's not this foundational element. Now, humans, we just drill wells into the deeper parts to get that water for irrigation, but we're just increasing the rate and intensity of desertification, making something that's going to take millions of years to repair. Then the droughts come, the crops fail, eventually the fires burn up the whole landscape, and you're left with desert where it was rich, fertile, verdant ground. And so this is this cycle of extremes, extreme flood, extreme drought, extreme fire. We're seeing it everywhere in the world, from Australia to here, anywhere you are, you can experience these extremes. And so let's take a little history lesson and look at what's happened in different places. This is a tree, it's called Big Mama. It was alive on this continent, Turtle Island, before Christopher Columbus arrived. And through its lifetime, it has gone from a system of stewardship where people understood and recognized the interconnectivity and the sacredness of all life, to one based on extraction. And we've gone from being able to drink out of any river, any stream, any lake, to entire watersheds being not serviceable for fishing or swimming And that's one thing for us, but the fish can't go to a doctor when it's sick. When its water is toxic, it has to live with our toxicity. So let's look at some of these old river basins. This is the Levant. 10,000 years ago, this was one of the most fertile places in the world. This was the birthplace of agriculture. It didn't used to look like this. But what happened is as they broke up the landscape, as they poorly managed grazing animals, they killed all of the vegetation that drew in the moisture from the coast. And so now this is a hot, humid desert because there's no condensation nuclei. All of the biological systems that would make that humid hazes actually fall as rain have been taken out of the equation. And then that conveyor belt has stopped. And so now you get the desert that it is. And we've done this to the tune of 1/3 of the whole surface area of the earth in 10,000 years. That's what humans have degraded in really a pretty short order. And what really scares me is we're getting better at it. We're doing it better, bigger, faster. So we have these cities that are all just draining all of the water away and nothing to offset that. And not only that, but usually these cities are down in the bottom of a valley. So this is Bogota. You can see all of the water actually feeds to this valley that would have been full of wetlands and would have helped infiltrate that water into the water table. Now it's all just being drained away, causing flooding downstream, followed by drought. And so you see the effects of it in these natural disasters that there's really nothing natural about, with huge scale flooding all around the world, huge scale drought all around the world, huge scale fire all around the world. And these things, this water scarcity is actually leading to famine, it's leading to refugee crisis, it's leading to war, it's leading to all these different human quality of life issues. So this is a graph that's water flow over time, and it's showing you what the concreted landscape does to water flow over time versus what the rich vegetated landscape can do. So this is the same amount of water, but how long it sticks in the system. So in the concrete landscape, that rain comes, it all runs off, you know, everything above here is runoff, and then none of that infiltrated into the ground, so very quickly the whole scenario is dry. Your photosynthetic growing season is incredibly short here. Also, the time that trees are cooling the air, 590 calories per gram that they respire, that's greatly diminished. In this living system, you still have some runoff, but a lot of that water is actually absorbed into this cool sponge that's just ready to take it. And so that water flow through the system is extended. Now, what do you end up with in this designed flood and drought scenario? Well, you end up with erosion, you end up with risk, you end up with the costs associated with those. Then you have to have insurance for flood and crop failure and drought and fire. Then you have the finance charge to do all of that. But because you're designing for the flood, you're also designing for the drought. And so then you also need crop insurance for that side, fire. And this is really creating a situation that's just, it's not viable. Not viable for farmers, it's not viable for stewards of the land, for homesteaders, for anybody. And so this is what that picture looks like. This is New York City under indigenous stewardship and under colonial stewardship. Now, in the indigenous stewardship, there's an understanding that all life is interconnected, that it's all sacred, and that it's all important. And this is what that kind of stewardship results in. In the colonial perspective, everything is a resource with energy to exploit. It's going somewhere else. It needs to be turned into money. And it really speaks for itself, the difference in these landscapes. So we have situations where we know we've lost, but we also have situations where we're actively losing. So this is the Amazon, and a really good example of the biotic pump. So in the Amazon, between 50 and 80% of the moisture that falls is created by these hygroscopic nuclei, created by trees. So if you clear more than 50% of the Amazon at once, you're actually creating a bunch of high pressure domes and this conveyor belt that brings moisture in through to the rest of the continent. You start breaking that up, you start building the pressure on this ocean, creating more catastrophic hurricanes in different areas. but you're also reducing the amount of precipitation they receive down here because of deforestation here. And so it's the level of interconnectivity, it's everywhere. It's between nations, it's between continents. And so what do we need? We need a new water paradigm. We need a new way to look at how we manage water. And so a lot of this comes from my mentor, Seth Holzer, and it's really the most important thing is to love and respect nature, to love and respect water, to treat it as a sacred good, as a common good, and a shared resource for all life. And when you start to partner with nature, you can create some really incredible differences. So here's a community that didn't have enough water. That's that community after creating a water retention landscape. This is just with the rain from the sky. And now they've gone from being on a deep borehole well to having shallow springs and drinking water that's recharged by their own water retention landscape. He's created this beautiful farm, the Krameterhof, which is really an amazing example. And it's left me with people talk about him.
Sure. Yeah, and I need to share the.
No.
Oops.
Wow, that was a
See.
powerful little video.
Yeah. And we can discuss that a little now, or we could do it at the end. We'll have a question and answer at the end also. Anybody have anything immediate they'd like to bring up?
Well, I have a question about aquifers. I got from the film that there are natural aquifers. Traveling in California, I've seen man-made aquifers. Do you know what the percentage is of one and the other?
I'm not sure what you're referring to for seeing in California. You'd certainly see reservoirs on the surface where they create water impoundments from dams and so forth. Aquifers are underground, so we really can't see them.
Well, these were called aquifers and they were above ground, kind of on the hills, and
Interesting.
that water was flowing through them.
I've not heard that definition or use of aquifer for things above ground.
Okay.
So yeah, it sounds like maybe they're calling reservoirs or water impoundments aquifers also.
Canal, something.
Maybe so.
Yeah. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. And I wanted to share, this is an appropriate thing after that film. Lynn Bowers was was involved with community rights right at the start. She passed on a few years ago, but she made this bumper sticker back in 1990. It has her initials on it, and big trees cause rain. And we have another video here, how beavers engineer the land, and we'll need to share this. So share a screen again too. So let's see. Share.
Yep.
And then so
No, that's the wrong share. Just shared your slideshow.
oh, okay.
So stop.
Share.
Sorry, guys, we're getting there.
Yeah,
Practice makes perfect.
yeah. Here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Beavers bring life to rivers and the land. They re-engineer the landscape to create safe habitats for themselves where they can hide from predators and swim to where their food grows. Beavers feed on bark and leaves in the late autumn or winter, then switch to softer wetland plants in the spring and summer. Life is easy for the beavers that live on big rivers, but when the best habitats are fully occupied, young beavers are forced away from them through vicious territorial disputes and must make their homes along the narrow tributaries. Here they're more vulnerable to predators, so millions of years ago, to avoid the big cats that preyed on them, they learned to build dams. In doing so, they radically change the habitats in which they live. Using stones, branches, and mud with astonishing ingenuity, they construct first one and then a series of small dams. Wherever they find a leak, they stop it up. Before long, even small seasonal streams start to look like mountain rice paddies dammed up with wood, a series of stepped pools surrounded by wetlands. These are phenomenally rich habitats that abound with life, harboring an abundance of insects, great concentrations of frogs, small mammals, and water birds. Beaver dams also regulate floods and droughts, cleanse the water of sediments, filter out poisons, and recharge groundwater. North American tribes revered the beaver. They knew that the wetlands beavers create are the Earth's kidneys, purifying water and regulating its flow. They noticed that beavers are highly social creatures who live in their lodges built of sticks in tight family groups. They saw that the adults go to great lengths to care for their offspring. Aunts and uncles from earlier litters look after the youngest kids. They carry them away from danger, clasped to their chests with their front paws. They warn them of aquatic predators by slapping their tails on the water. They bring green food to the kits when they're too small to leave the lodge. They cuddle them and call gently to them. For these reasons, Native Americans call them the little people. In the late 1600s, the Europeans came. For them, beavers represented something quite different: commercial value. Europe's beavers, that once numbered in the tens of millions, had been almost eliminated because of the value of their scent glands. Beavers' scent glands contain castoreum, a compound that's rich in salicylic acid from the willow bark the animals eat. This is a powerful painkiller. The combination of this valuable compound, the beaver's fine fur and tasty meat, ensured that one animal was worth as much as an entire year's earnings for a medieval peasant. While castoreum from American beavers was less valuable, as they ate more cottonwood than willow, their soft, thick pelts put a high price on their backs. Demand was insatiable. In particular, people wanted their fur for hats. Beaver hats made from felted underfur were waterproof and durable. Trappers fanned out across the New World, scouring its wetlands for valuable pelts. By the time the geographers, mapmakers, photographers, and settlers arrived in their footsteps, the beavers were long gone. As the beavers disappeared, the water went with them. Rich ecosystems, especially in the southern states, dried up and vanished. Hunting grounds and fisheries collapsed. Forest fires raged through the shriveled vegetation around the dried out creeks. The rangelands downstream turned brown. Cattle jostled to drink from the last of the old beaver ponds. Eradicating beavers was a terrible mistake, causing harm that cascaded through our living systems. But by bringing back the little people to the depleted lands of Europe and North America, we can restore our rivers and wetlands, recharge our groundwater, stop floods and droughts, and witness once more the abundance of wildlife that accompanies beavers wherever they make their homes.
Yeah, that's one of the better little videos on beavers I've seen out there.
I have a question.
Yes.
On the first video, right where you cut it off, did it say how long it took that area that was revitalized and the groundwater and the little ponds came back to life? How long it took them to get there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I did not hear that on that. The film went on about 5 more minutes. Their approach, which I think can be workable and helpful, is even to use heavy equipment and so forth to create water retaining landscapes. And but it didn't mention anything about beaver, which will do it for free and perhaps do it more in tune with how nature works. But anyway, both are real possibilities, and it'd be really good to know how long that took to transform that waterscape of theirs. So as you know, Oregon is, the nickname is the Beaver State, and we have a beaver on the back of our flag. Apparently, we're the only state that has a different image on each side of the flag. And in Oregon, beavers are listed as predators, pests of agricultural crops and products, so they can be killed with impunity. And climate change policy recommendations have to be politically neutral, meaning that they are essentially impossible to enact, as neither beaver nor climate change is considered apolitical by many of the involved bureaus and land managers. This is a quote. So the benefits of beaver recolonization are well established and well documented, but Oregon's political process stymies action. Between 2008 and 2017, 9 state agencies and working groups released 13 reports addressing climate change and wildlife and land adaptation. Baldwin notes that none of these mentioned beavers. To avoid controversy and legislative veto, the reports, quote, generally avoid calls to make any material changes. And in Oregon, the Department of Agriculture also represents the timber industry, and since beaver reintroductions can lead to road failure, the powerful industry demands the right to control beavers on their land.
When I was in New York, the subway station at Astor Place, I guess it was built in the early 20th century. There were like white tiles all over the walls and on the posts, and there were tiles of beavers. Wow. And I didn't know what that was about, and I never checked it out. But Astor was like this rich guy who made money from the beaver industry in Oregon.
Huh.
And I lived for decades in New York, not knowing why there were tiles of beavers in the Astor Place subway station. That was at like 8th Street and like Broadway, in sort of where the East Village met the West Village. And I'm embarrassed now to admit that I never checked it out, never had any idea what that was about. But as soon as I moved to Oregon, I kind of learned, and it was like, oh.
Yeah, were those beaver pelts or
No, they were pictures. They
Okay.
were I'm sorry.
taxidermied?
They were tiles. There were tiles
tiles, okay.
on tiles, you know, because the walls were tiled and the posts were tiled with white tiles, but in between all the white tiles, there was a tile of a picture of a beaver, like a live beaver. Like it was obvious that it was a beaver, but I didn't know why, because I was ignorant of the history. I didn't know where Astor made his money.
Yeah.
And it was called Astor Place, duh. So yeah, every time we talk about beavers, I think of that. And I wonder how many other people don't know the history and don't know what we're losing, you know, what we have lost and are losing by our extirpation of these creatures.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Laura. Yeah, so landscapes before white arrival. Journals of explorers and trappers testify to Western landscapes built in part by beavers. Writes Baldwin, now channelized and arid valley floors across the American West were once difficult to traverse due to multiple channels and broad riparian floodplains covered by dense vegetation. Could such landscapes created and maintained by beavers be brought back? Beavers were largely trapped out of the Western US, including Oregon, by the 1840s. Wetlands were drained all over the country, especially where they could be made into farmland. The Willamette Valley had abundant wetlands that were largely drained. And for those of you who saw our last presentation on the Longcom River, the valley in Eugene around Amazon Creek were multiple braided streams that changed course, and Amazon Creek was a human creation forcing all that water into one channel. So it never existed before that.
Bring up the green color.
And this lower map is of the lower 48 states and percentage of wetland loss. And you can see Oregon is less than 50%. But the really heavy agricultural states like California, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio have had over 85% of wetland loss. And the wetland loss in Oregon was really significant because the Willamette Valley had wetlands everywhere. And they pretty much largely got drained. And white settlers change and legalize the water landscape. White settlers had an ownership and control model in their thinking about water. All these wetlands and braided flooding streams needed to be legally owned and controlled so that the land could be made to allow Western ways of living and food production. This is very different than the indigenous people who lived here. They largely adapted to water in the landscape and didn't significantly change waterscapes. The control model of relating to watersheds includes draining wetlands, channeling streams, making diversion canals, dams, and irrigation. water is kind of ironically, but for control, is brought back to the land for farming via irrigation. So we get rid of all the water on the land, but then we bring it back under our control. Dams are a significant control medium in this approach, and they help facilitate irrigation and so forth. And just some of the purposes of dams: irrigation, of course, water supply, hydropower, which is doesn't have a carbon footprint like others, but pump storage, flood control. Probably the largest reason given for all the dams in the Willamette Valley was for flood control, because there was regular flooding that settlers didn't want to live with, and it Western lifestyles, it was very inconvenient. Mills, ornamental lakes, canals, and tailings are all different reasons for dams.
David, I don't understand tailings for mining waste. How did dams?
Oh, so you might have heard in the news even some catastrophic failing of tailings dams where they broke, and there was one, I think, in Tennessee where all this coal tar just did enormous damage to communities and watersheds downstream. They basically hold back all this mining waste. And
So the dam is created to hold tailings?
yeah. And
Okay.
they can fail for sure. And some of the disadvantages of dams: they change ecosystems, they can flood. They flood out land upstream. A lot of times even communities have to leave. People need to leave their land because of the flooded out area. Loss of sediment below the stream, so delta starvation. Silting of the lake, they start filling up with silt. Fish trapped below the dam. There's all sorts of scenarios to try to allow fish to get over dams and around them and so forth, but it's nothing. They're all detrimental to fish. Potential dam failure. There's talk of and there's some active searching this out. I went to eWeb presentation to the River Road community, that because we live in River Road, and we're in the potential floodplain if there is a dam failure due to a catastrophic earthquake, which we're due for. And they were reassuring that the risk is small, but there's just a lot of unknowns. If say Hills Creek Reservoir broke, it would probably take out the 2 dams below. And dams also even out the flow during the year, which prevents sediment renewal on floodplains. So like the Lake Mead and Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado, they have basically, the Glen Canyon Dam above Grand Canyon has made for alterations in Grand Canyon National Park, and the sediment that it depended on for renewal along the river that whole thing has gotten messed up, and it's changed the river through the Grand Canyon. And
those dams started silting up before they were even fully whatever they call it, before it was fully it started silting up.
yeah,
because the river can't flow.
yeah, it just doesn't, it just settles, and it loses capacity over time. Here's a long list of negative impacts of of dams that I won't read all of them, but you can certainly look them up. There are just many different downsides. And just to give you an idea of the dams in Oregon, here's a map showing all the different dams, and that can get defined. They can get defined differently. Like the Long Tom below the Fern Ridge Reservoir Dam has like 8 more different impoundments on it before it reaches the Willamette River, and that's a fairly short stretch. They're very small, but so this probably does not include those. And here is dams in the Willamette Basin, dams and reservoirs. And you can see right around Eugene, there's quite a number of them. So Fern Ridge here, this would be Hills Creek, Lookout, and I'm blanking out on these now.
Fall Creek, Dexter.
Yeah, 11, you can see Fall Creek, and 12, Dexter, 9 is Darena, 8 is Cottage Grove, and then 5 is Blue River. These are on the Mackenzie. 6 is Cougar. So. And ownership, moving on to ownership rights. In the United States, we have generally divided ownership related to land and watersheds into property rights, water rights, and subsurface rights. Other rights that can be legally recognized include air rights, rights to light, development rights, and timber rights. And you can see here, over here on the right, subsurface rights includes mineral rights and oil and gas. And those can be separate from the property rights and the water rights. So the legal landscape for trying to protect watersheds gets very complex. And Oregon's water laws are based on the principle of prior appropriation. This means the first person to obtain a water right on a stream is the last to be shut off in times of low stream flows. In water short times, the water right holder with the oldest date of priority can demand the water specified in his or her water right without regard for the needs of the junior users. If there is a surplus beyond what is necessary to fulfill the senior right, the water right holder with the next oldest priority date can take what is available to satisfy needs under his or her right. This continues down the line until there is no surplus or until all rights are satisfied. The date of application for a permit to use water usually becomes the priority date of the right. And most of the Western states follow this kind of thing with the prior appropriation doctrine, which gives permit holders the right to divert a specific amount of water for an approved beneficial use. And for water rights in Oregon, under Oregon law, all water belongs to the public. With some exceptions, cities, irrigators, businesses, and other water users must obtain a permit or a license from the Water Resources Department to use water from any source, whether it is underground or from lakes or streams. Generally speaking, landowners with water flowing past, though, or through or under their property do not automatically have the right to use that water without the authorization of the department. This would be a riparian doctrine rather than the principle of prior appropriation that Oregon has. Most eastern states follow the former, a riparian doctrine, which dictates that the landowner has rights to the body of water that touches the borders of their property. All the legally recognized ownership rights noted above make it difficult to protect watersheds and to restore those that are degraded. There are many different state and federal laws in addition to the ownership rights laws noted above that can relate to water and watershed quality. The Clean Water Act is a primary federal law attempting to improve water quality in the US. And the Clean Water Act, CWA, its objective is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. The CWA made it unlawful to discharge any pollutant from a point source into navigable waters unless a permit was obtained. And the EPA's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit program controls discharges. Point sources are discrete conveyances such as pipes or man-made ditches. And there's a distinction in law with point sources and non-point sources. So industrial, municipal, and other facilities must obtain permits if their discharges go directly to surface waters. And note that non-point sources of pollution, such as logging roads, are exempt from this law. So is aerial spraying of pesticides and other dispersed sources of pollution and harm. And water covers over 70% of the Earth's surface. It is a very important resource for people and the environment. One of the most urgent problems of today's life is pollution, especially water pollution. And some more pretty water here. And this diagram shows a lot of different sources of pollution of surface water and unconfined freshwater aquifer and confined freshwater aquifers. So you can get waste lagoon infiltrating, coal mine, different mining infiltrating into that, landfill feeding it. You can see a hazardous injection well reaching down and leaking into the freshwater aquifer, buried gasoline and solvent tanks, and pesticides and fertilizers that get down into the unconfined aquifer. Polluted air can land in water and percolate down also. And another one, this shows more non-point source pollution that contributes to water pollution. Soil, manure, fertilizers, all these add up, destroyed habitats that further can have pollution in them. All this can get into waterways and cause algae blooms and so forth that make water not safe to drink and so forth. Salem, Oregon had to put in wells. They couldn't use the Detroit Reservoir anymore because of algae blooms, is my understanding. And another law that relates, there are so many different laws and there's no way to get into all of them, but I chose Oregon's Right to Farm and Forest Law, the Farm and Forest Practices Act. In the 1990s, the Oregon legislature passed a right to farm bill. Such so-called right to farm laws insulate agricultural operations, including large industrial livestock confinement operations, and in Oregon, private timber companies against lawsuits as long as they're following what is, or in some cases may become, a quote, generally accepted farming or forest practice. These can include heavy aerial pesticide applications, and in fact, Oregon's law specifically states that pesticide use is a protected practice as long as it complies with applicable laws and is done in a reasonable and prudent manner. There is no exception to this protection carved out for pesticides that end up on adjacent properties. These pesticides end up polluting our water and watersheds, and residents are prevented from successfully suing the pesticide applicator and timberland owners for damages. And we in community rights view federal, state, and local laws regarding protection of water and watersheds to be wholly inadequate. They are mostly permits to pollute and degrade rather than preventing harm. Our laws don't recognize rights of nature and can't be made adequate without nature having rights. Rights of nature laws are starting to be passed in many parts of the world, including in the United States. In Lane County, we are moving to submit a rights of nature initiative to protect the water and watersheds in our county. This initiative, if passed, would allow Lane County residents to protect our watersheds and stop harm before it happens. And that's our logo for our campaign. And Protect Our Watersheds is a political arm of Community Rights Lane County and created to move forward an ordinance to secure rights of water and watersheds to sustainable recharge flow sufficient to protect native fish habitat and clean water unpolluted by any activities of corporations, governments, and other business entities. We are a group of dedicated Lane County residents that believe our rights to protect our watersheds are inherently more important than corporate bottom lines. Our initiative can be viewed on our website at Protect Lane County Watersheds. And some watershed protections, things to do to help create and protect watersheds. And I will end with going through this briefly and then welcoming your thoughts on other ways we can help create healthy watersheds and protect healthy watersheds. So in addition to supporting and helping with our initiative, educate yourself further about watersheds and share with others. Support the reintroduction of beavers into our watersheds. Educate yourself further about rights of nature and share with others. Pressure your representatives to support rights of nature and to changing laws that don't protect our health, safety, and welfare. Educate yourself about ceiling preemption laws that protect corporate profits over our health, safety, and welfare. Pressure your representatives to change these laws. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ceiling preemption, it's where the federal or state governments make laws that take away choice from a more local community. So the feds on the state, or the state on our county or a township, that we can't protect ourselves from a corporation coming in and doing harm in the community, that kind of thing. And support dam removal. And some of the things in the film on water being the planet's blood, some great ideas for changing the health of our watersheds and supporting a healthy water cycle. Oh, and we'll end with these two, if you come in, and there. So any questions, thoughts, things you'd like to add to things we can do to help protect our watersheds?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the scientific community, are they welcoming the idea of reintroduction of beaver with any seriousness or any widespread projects? Is it real to the scientific community?
My take, oh, Chuck, do you want to answer?
Yeah, there's a huge effort in Oregon, science-based, watershed council-based, and others, advocates of watersheds, to get policy right on beavers and reintroduce beavers. It's not hard. There's plenty of beavers out there. The timber industry, industrials, you know, there's a whole world of beaver trapping, beaver prosecution under the industrial forest regime, not just because the beavers impact roads crossings, but because beavers chew on the plantations next to streams. And so the timber boys just persecute beavers like no tomorrow. and they're protected by Oregon law. So I would strongly suggest aligning with and supporting the beaver reintroduction movement. It's a big world out there.
Thank you.
Now, David, you talked a bit about water rights and water allocation and the system we use, what is it, prior appropriation, I guess? It would seem that that's so deeply baked into, like, I don't know, Oregon law, that it's not going to change. Are there ever any attempts to change who gets what water, either here or elsewhere?
I think there are attempts, but I have not delved deeply into that at all. That's a very good question. Maybe somebody else in the audience has some thoughts on it. It is very entrenched, and people who have water rights will generally fiercely protect them and the system that they're under.
And there's just what seems to me, just as a layperson, really stupid policies around water rights, where people with water rights feel they have to use the water in order to keep the right. And so often they do things that aren't the most, effective uses of the water, just to use it up and keep their ability to get the same amount next year.
Rob, maybe a rights of nature initiative would help with that problem.
We should work on that. That's a good idea. Let's get one of those going.
So the rights of nature, what's it called, a petition? No, wait a minute. What is it? A ballot measure that we're working on is it's a way to go up against the state and federal laws. You mentioned a lot of state laws.
Yeah, it's just a different paradigm for protecting the environment, and it does a few things. One is it would be recognizing certain inherent rights. You can have rights of nature for different things, like you could have it for wild rights, as some of the indigenous tribes have done, or in our case, rights of nature based on protecting the watersheds. And the idea is that you would recognize certain inherent rights of the watersheds, like to be free of pollution. We're also recognizing other rights for humans, like the right to have affordable and clean domestic water or drinking water. And one way to think of it is, and I don't know whether this will prove true or not. Part of what we do is challenge the system, but the system has said we're not allowed to regulate, pesticide practices or aerial pesticides, right? So we can't, we could try, but we can't go and pass a law locally that says you can't spray. But what we're attempting to do is to pass a law that says you can't pollute the watersheds. And then if you do, we have a mechanism to sue you, essentially. So that might be a way where a sort of a backdoor way where we could go after the aerial sprayers and say, we didn't tell you can't spray, that we didn't pass a law that said you can't spray, but we just said you can't pollute our water, and looks like you're doing it, so stop what you're doing. So it might be an end around, or at least it's an attempt at that. But it also gives residents of Lane County the ability to stand in on behalf of the watershed and take a legal action. Whereas right now you would maybe just be relying on the government to do something to protect, certain environmental, or natural features, right? Which they probably wouldn't do because they're often, in cahoots with the people who are doing the pollution. But it would mean that you or I could, challenge the polluter and say, hey, I'm standing in on behalf of the Coast Fork watershed and saying, hey, that's not okay to do that. You got to stop.
But then the state will just come back and say, we have these laws that preempt your local law.
Well, they can preempt us from writing laws to ban aerial spraying, but they haven't preempted us from saying you can't pollute the watershed. So it would be an interesting, sort of legal confrontation.
Thank you.
Oh, Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck.
Well, my feeling is, or belief, is that we are so far advanced down a cancerous industrial system that has completely altered the biogeochemical processes of the planet, the water cycle being probably the most important, but the others are important too. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to power, i.e. in the state legislators, and confronting things like water rights and just say, this whole water right thing, property right thing, all these things that are bedrock that the power structure relies on legally to maintain their power, we just call bullshit on.
Right.
Put them on notice. We're in a climate emergency. We're in a biodiversity collapse emergency, and these things gotta be called into question. This isn't 20 years ago.
Right.
It's all on the line, and we've got that calls into question every fundamental basis that the whole industrial power system has built on itself on to maintain its privileged position.
No.
That's my, rhetorical 5 cents on a Monday night.
Yep. Well, I mean, we saw with the pandemic that when things get dire enough that people start to look at different options. I mean, you would have never thought you would have a gazillion people working from home, switching switching that model. Companies that never would let anybody work from home 1 day a week, all of a sudden half their workforce or more was not showing up in the office. So people can change when things are dire enough, hopefully.
I support getting in their face.
Yeah.
At a fundamental level.
Yeah.
Barb.
No, it's just saying I agree.
Oh, okay.
Let's get in your face.
I'm with Barb.
I mean, it's really exciting what's been going on in Iran. Talking about getting in their face. I'm not quite as courageous as those women, but there seems to be movements all over the planet on one level or another, pushing back against business as usual, and they're really inspiring.
Amen, sister.
Any other thoughts or questions or anything? Well, I guess we're good. Thanks for attending and your interest. And yeah, as Rob said, we'll have our next Community Rights Action meeting in January.
And it'll be the 4th Monday, not the 3rd, because of Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
January 23rd.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, David. That was really good. Those
Yeah,
videos and
thank
shows were
you.
amazing.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.